Tony Perkins, who I understand is in Israel today, and also to Tom, and I want to thank the Family Research Council for hosting this event today. I can't think of anywhere else that I would rather be than the Family Research Council to announce to you my core of conviction. Should I have the privilege of becoming the next President of the United States, I want to share with you some of the principles that would guide me in that endeavor. And I believe that one of the most important promises that any president can ever make to the American people is the one that they make on Inauguration Day. It's the one that they make when they raise their right hand and they say, "I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God." Now that we have that practice run out of the way, that is the promise, unfortunately, too often, that has been neglected by too many presidents in recent years. Because today, our current president, Obama, appears intent on ignoring our Constitution by continually abusing his executive power when he chooses which laws he will uphold and which ones he will not. We saw him say that he would not uphold the law of the land, which is the Defense of Marriage Act. We also saw the president say he would not uphold the deportation laws, yet they are the laws of the land. I want to share today with you the principles that will guide me in my decision making. When events arise and when facts change and Congress intervenes, then policies have to adapt. We all understand that. But principles, however, should be immutable. They should be the core of one's conviction. And President Obama believes in cultivating power unto himself and centralizing power unto himself. He's been willing to engage during his presidency in a massive redistribution of wealth and in the politics of an Occupy Wall Street envy to achieve his purposes. And the president's economic policies, most notable of which is Obamacare, represent the most ambitious social economic engineering project in the history of the United States. It is in fact a great leap beyond the New Deal and the Great Society. Contrast that with the 10th Amendment, or the 10th Commandment, which teaches that we should not covet what belongs to our neighbor. That's a principle for good government that's worked historically in the United States. America also needs to open our eyes because we need only to look at Europe and focus our attention on Greece, because socialism means failure and socialism kills a growing economy. And yet while Greece is crashing, President Obama has called for America to be even more like Greece. He's calling for even more government welfare, more government-funded student loans, more government mortgages, and more government spending to create yet more government jobs. What he's calling for is more failure when America needs more success. Because socialism is a principle that I will reject, and I will work to eradicate socialism all across the United States government. But unfortunately for too many Republicans, they also aspire to be frugal socialists. And the reason President Obama and some Republicans can get behind socialized medicine is because they share the same core political philosophy about the purpose of government. We can't preserve liberty if the choice a year from now is between a frugal socialist and an out-of-control socialist, because the government that is given to us was a constitutional republic where elected legislators make all the laws. In fact, I think the most important question that any organization asks itself is this: who makes the rules? The NFL has to answer that question, a college student government has to answer that question, and that's certainly true of the United States of America. But when President Obama issues an executive order about student loans or mortgages or green energy plans or anything else that directly controls private people or private property, well, that's when President Obama himself is making laws. And unfortunately, he's become far too comfortable in that role. The president or executive agency should not make laws. That's not what our Constitution provides. One of the most serious problems with Obamacare is the number of times that legislation says the secretary shall. The rules on abortion funding and countless other areas are not found in the Obamacare bill itself, It's found in the reams of bureaucratic rules that have only now begun to emerge from the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And that's why I've been advocating for the repeal of Obamacare, even from before the time that it was passed. Some have naively said they will issue waivers or executive orders to repeal Obamacare, but only the full-scale repeal will stop the cancer of Obamacare from metastasizing across all of healthcare and from across all of our economy. We can't afford to have a candidate who fails to understand the complexity of Obamacare or the urgency of its repeal, because we have only one chance for repeal. One chance, and that's 2012. Because if we fail to repeal Obamacare, we will only sink a nation that's already broke and mired in debt. Likewise, our judiciary does not make law. President Obama believes that judges can change the meaning of the Constitution by reinterpreting its words and by discovering new unwritten rights that the founders never contemplated. And here's a case in point: the use of UN treaties and other international law to interpret our Constitution. Every fourth grade child in the United States historically knew you could not use anything other than the Constitution of the United States to interpret law, because the UN has nothing to say about the meaning of the Constitution. I guarantee, as president, every judicial nominee will have demonstrated an unwavering commitment to the rule of law, as that law was originally written. President Obama has wrongly committed to the ratification of a number of UN treaties, including the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, that would bind us to legal obligations, both internationally and domestically, that are contrary to the United States Constitution. According to Article 6 of our Constitution, once ratified, an international treaty becomes part of the supreme law of our land. And moreover, any state law that would conflict with that treaty would be overruled by the treaty. Virtually all American laws regarding children and parents is state law, and therefore the UN treaty would contain scores of rules that would contradict existing American law regarding medical care, education, religion, virtually every area that belongs solely to parental decision-making. This treaty would in fact threaten the most basic unit of government that the Family Research Council and many of the organizations that are here represented today come to defend, and that's the family. And as president, I will withdraw the signature of the United States from this treaty and from every other unratified UN treaty of this type. Because the UN is not the only threat to the American family. Some American officials have also gone too far in invading the legitimate decisions of American parents, like being told by their doctors and insurance companies that federal HIPAA regulations prevent them from obtaining their children's medical records and even medical test results. This is absolutely ridiculous. I was an early co-sponsor of the Parental Rights Amendment, and I will assure passage of the PRA as President of the United States. I refer you to the case of Troxel v. Granville. Justice Scalia recently wrote that until parental rights are written into the actual text of the Constitution, there is no basis for a judge to protect parental rights. Now, while judges may be confused about the importance of parents in the life of a child, I don't share their confusion. Make no mistake, while not always possible, children are best served when they are raised in a home with a mom and a dad, and I will fight to protect the rights of parents, the family, and the institution of marriage. Those are at the core of my conviction. And these principles form the basis of a civilized nation and the backbone of a healthy society. If family is rendered meaningless in the United States, then we will be on the road to ruin. Make no mistake, because preserving the family is vital to preserving our nation. The misinterpretation of the Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause in the Constitution are chiefly responsible today for the runaway debt and the regulatory chaos that threaten to crush our economy and curtail our liberty. For example, Congress used the Commerce Clause to close all the incandescent light bulb factories in the United States and instead replace them with so-called environmentally friendly light bulbs. In response, I champion the Light Bulb Freedom of Choice Act. I believe in liberty for light bulbs. But this wasn't just about the right for Americans to choose which light bulb we wish to use. It's our fundamental right as citizens not to have the government tell us how we have to live our lives every day in every tiny particular of our lives. Because at the core of my belief is that it's the American people and not the federal government that knows what's best for our lives. And the government exists to protect that right to liberty, not just to diminish it. Here's another area that's a core of my conviction: jurisdiction. There are jurisdictional areas that only the family can solve. Jurisdictional areas that only the individual can solve. Jurisdictional areas that only the church may have authority over. Jurisdictional areas that belong to private business. Jurisdictional areas that belong to the state. Jurisdiction, that's an American principle. I believe the Constitution assigns one and only one level of government to deal with each of these areas of policy. The federal government has exclusive jurisdiction over foreign policy, over military affairs, the protection of our borders, the minting of our money, and a few other topics. States have exclusive jurisdiction over health, welfare, education, family law, and the vast majority of criminal law. The 10th Amendment tells us if the subject is not assigned to Congress, it remains by default with the states. The people don't get double or triple the services when multiple layers of government address the same issue. We get conflict, we get confusion, we get untoward expense, and that's a very expensive problem. As president, I guarantee you two things. First, I will veto every new law from Congress that seeks to add yet another layer of unconstitutional regulation under the guise of the Commerce Clause. Second, I will reverse the damage from decades of Great Society type programs. Washington, D.C. will never look the same again under my administration. We're nearly $15 trillion in debt, and much of it is due to an improper view of the General Welfare Clause. The current view is that Congress can spend any amount of money they'd like on anything it wants. Congress believes that the Constitution imposes no limit on its spending, and I've watched them do exactly that. Our nation needs to stop doing for people what they can and should do for themselves. That revives the principle of a national work ethic that we have sadly forgotten. That means an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. Self-reliance means if anyone will not work, neither should he eat. Take a look at the case of Butler versus the United States. The Supreme Court addressed the question, what limits are there on the federal spending imposed by the Constitution? And the court pointed out there was a dispute between Alexander Hamilton and James Madison on this very issue. Because you see, James Madison thought the spending power was strictly limited to enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8, while Hamilton believed there was additional power to spend beyond the General Welfare Clause itself. And here's a practical example from our history. Look to Thomas Jefferson, who worried that his Louisiana Purchase was unconstitutional because he could not find an enumerated power to make a land purchase to expand our nation. But Hamilton believed the Louisiana Purchase was justified by the General Welfare Clause because it was beyond the power of an individual state to make such a purchase. And like the Louisiana Purchase, today's space program also passes this Constitution's two-part test for federal spending. Number one, it is for the general welfare, and number two, it's beyond the jurisdiction of one single state. By contrast, social welfare programs like food stamps, public housing, Head Start programs, among others, are within the jurisdiction of the states. Both Hamilton and Madison would agree the federal government cannot spend money on welfare programs. And my decision to follow this principle will balance our nation's budget. Another area, education, also belongs to the states. The federal government has no constitutional jurisdiction to spend money on education programs. I will repeal in totality federal education law. I will close the Federal Department of Education, and I will allow the states to keep the money that they've been sending to Washington, D.C. Because unless we want to go the way of Greece, we have to adhere to the organizational structure of our Constitution and stop the federal government from spending for purposes that are only within the jurisdiction of the states. As president, I will veto all new spending for new programs that properly belong to the states, and I will begin the systematic process of dismantling the current duplication. I want to say one very important thing about Article 4 of the Constitution. This article says that Congress has the duty to guarantee to all Americans a Republican form of government. The principle of self-government, that there should be no taxation without representation, was the rallying cry of this nation. And we're violating the constitutional commitment of self-government when we impose a crushing burden of federal debt on our children, unlike any ever seen before in the history of mankind. This crushing debt is being imposed upon our children and subsequent generations. George Washington warned against, quote, the progressive accumulation of debt, which must ultimately endanger all governments. For every $143 of federal spending, we pay $100 with current taxes. We send the bill for the other 43 with compounding interest to generations that are yet unborn. So far, that total is reaching $15 trillion, and it will be $16 trillion before the conclusion of next year. Our children will be taxed tomorrow for money that's already been spent on what? A welfare state. A welfare state that is bringing us to decline and to our knees. And yet future generations had no vote on whether to spend this money. In my opinion, that is an immoral act. And in my opinion, that is an unconstitutional taxation for generations yet born, unborn without their representation. More and more of that spending is occurring because government does what both the Constitution and what decent morality prohibit, and that is crony capitalism. That is what is making up Washington, D.C. today, crony capitalism, forcefully taking the people's money for the purpose of paying off a politician's political friends. And this president and other politicians aren't even very good at hiding it anymore. And it is to our shame that members of both political parties do this. Because the problem is one set of standards for individual Americans and another set of standards for those who make political donations to candidates. The most egregious example we've seen recently is Solyndra and other organizations. That's the way of a banana republic, and that's not reflective of my principles of equal treatment under the law. This practice, whether it occurs at the state level or the federal level, is letting the interests of a few outweigh the majority of Americans who don't have access to the system. And the solution is beyond obvious. We all look at Greece, every one of us in this room. Every one of us know exactly what Greece needs to do. Greece needs to stop spending money that they don't have. Greece needs to cut up their credit card, and Greece needs to shut down a few government agencies and let a few government employees go. Everyone in this room knows exactly what Greece needs to do. So all we need to do is look in the mirror, because that's America's problem too. We're going the way of Greece if we don't take our own medicine. I will honor the Constitution by never sending Congress an unbalanced budget for their consideration, except in times of declared war. And if Congress passes an unbalanced budget, well then they'd better have a 2/3 of both houses behind their extravagance, because I promise you, I will veto their spending every single time. In fiscal year 2010, the United States gave away, in a measure that is nothing more than fiscal insanity, $1.4 billion to nations like China, Mexico, Egypt, and other countries, each of whom own at least $10 billion in United States Treasury bonds. Unbelievable. China owns over $1.2 trillion in these bonds. This is a significant portion of the national debt, and yet we are giving aid to China, giving money away for free to the nations that own our debt instruments. Have we absolutely lost our minds? It's like giving a banker a large gift while he still owns our unpaid mortgage. I'll stop that foreign aid, and I'll stop it at once. And my concern for children isn't limited only to protecting them from financial bondage. First and foremost, I believe that every child has the right to life, because I believe that every child is made in the image and likeness of a holy God. This is an unalienable right that is guaranteed to us through our Declaration of Independence. And if we don't respect and protect those who are born and unborn, then our morals and our values will be without meaning in the future. Some Republican candidates seem confused by what it means to be 100% pro-life. I am both personally and publicly pro-life, and our candidate has to do more than just check the box on the issue of life. They need to have a proven record when it comes to standing up for the unborn and not be confused about what that means. I believe it's the role of government to protect life from conception to natural death. And I'll never be confused about that issue, and you won't find YouTube clips of me advocating anything else. Because that's another important imperative for repeal of Obamacare. Obamacare has now become the playground of the left. It is the social engineering tool where the left will always win and the right will never have a chance to stand up for the values and the morals that we fight for. For starters, Planned Parenthood in my administration will be zeroed out. And I will also work to protect the American family from activist judges who are trying to dismantle marriage as a legal institution solely between one man and one woman. Some Republican candidates seem confused about this issue as well. I am not. It is at the core of my conviction. Because I want, and I will work for, and I will get behind a federal marriage amendment so the courts cannot impose their will on the people of this country. Because when one state's judiciary legalizes same-sex marriage, then the legal pressure on every state to recognize such marriages becomes profound. One federal judge has already ruled that the voters in California violated the federal Constitution when they voted to limit marriage to one man and one woman. And President Obama has ordered his Justice Department not to enforce the Defense of Marriage Act, despite the fact that it is the law of the land. That flawed analysis will be the path to future activist courts. It will be an example for future presidents to overrun the will of the people and the legislative branch for their own will. Only a federal marriage amendment can prevent the courts of one state from imposing same-sex marriage on us all. As we recognize, one day from yesterday, the American people will make a decision about whether the United States of America, as we know it, will survive. This election is that serious. I believe this election is the last exit ramp to our national survival, whether we will remain a constitutional republic. After that, Obamacare will be impossible to repeal. We have one chance to repeal Obamacare. In all likelihood, one chance to repeal Dodd-Frank. And in all likelihood, one chance to abolish the tax code and put in place something that truly is fair, that gives equal treatment under the law and undermines once and for all crony capitalism. But the question we need to ask ourselves as Americans is this: do we want a free nation? Do we want a nation that aspires to protect life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness? Or do we want to be the socialist nation that President Obama has feverishly worked to give us throughout the course of his administration? So committed is he to centralized government that will be providing and will ensure the end of our sacred experiment in government. And while this election season has been full of surprises, I can assure you there will be no policy surprises with me. I am far from a perfect person, as all of you know too well, but I do know who I am, and I will never deviate from the principles that I have fought for all my life. I understand the challenges that the country faces, both domestic and foreign. I know who America's enemies are. A nuclear Iran is one. And I know who America's allies are. Chief among them are the state of Israel, which we must stand and protect. And I will assure you, I will do what President Obama has not. I will stand with Israel. I will not put daylight between the United States of America and our friend. And I'm prepared to face America's enemies. If we want to have a real choice next November, the bold colors of difference that Ronald Reagan described, then it is crucial that the Republican Party choose a candidate in the next several months who is committed, as I am, to liberty, and who has demonstrated a lifelong commitment to fighting to protect our wonderful constitutional form of government. I am that candidate that you can trust in office, because as president, I am and I will be truly committed to preserving and protecting common decency, to decent people, doing the decent thing, the right thing, the honest thing. And I will defend the Constitution of the United States. That is my commitment. That is the core of my conviction. That is the type of president that I will be. God bless you, and I look forward to your questions.